Hi, everyone.
Hello again. Raised subhead, a reversion to Old Testament circumstances. Unlike the Old Covenant, the priesthood, that is the priesthood of Israel, served as a superior court where all difficult matters were to be decided, and their decisions were binding, as the law stated. Quote, this is from Deuteronomy 17, by the way, verses 8 to 13. They must hand down to you the word of the judicial decision. Then you must do in accordance with the word that they will hand down to you from the place which Jehovah will choose. And you must be careful to do according to all that they instruct you, in accordance with the law that they will point out to you, and according to the judicial decisions that they will say to you, you should do. You must not turn aside from the word that they will hand down to you to the right or to the left. End of Deuteronomy quote.
No better description could be given of the view Jehovah's Witnesses today take toward decisions handed down to them by the Watchtower organization and its governing body, who stand for them as if in the position of the Old Covenant priesthood. In Crisis of Conscience, on pages 295 and 296, reference was made to an expression used by some traveling overseers, who, after holding up a green Watchtower publication, said that if the organization tells us this book is black, then, brothers, it is black. I would have thought that such a blatant advocating of blind credulity, a statement so utterly devoid of intelligence, would soon have disappeared, recognized for what it was, and dying from its own stupidity. Yet years later, persons who have corresponded with me and who are as yet associated with the organization relate this same expression being used in their area, not only in the United States, but in other countries, including Australia.
Back in the year 1541, in his writing Spiritual Exercises, the founder of the Jesuit order, Ignatius Loyola, wrote, quote, we should always be disposed to believe that that which appears to us to be white is really black, if the hierarchy of the Church so decides. Today, few Catholics would agree with Loyola, yet these words describe the precise mentality developed among many, if not most, of Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly among its traveling overseers. Another popular expression that has caught on with some traveling representatives and elders is, if the organization tells us to jump, our only question should be, how high? Similarly to those who question the truthfulness and scripturalness of certain teachings, the cliche used in reply by some of these men is, I would rather be wrong with the organization than be right and be alone. This surrender of all personal judgment not only says something of the type of persons who are viewed as qualified for responsibility by the organization. Because such incredibly shallow cliches and calls for blind, unthinking obedience are not forcefully repudiated by either the organization or by the great majority of hearers, it also reveals the degree to which the organization and its governing body now are viewed as equivalent to the priesthood of ancient Israel. Those expressions, to all intents and purposes, repeat the words of the Old Covenant, quote, you must not turn aside from the word that they will hand down to you, to the right or to the left, again from Deuteronomy 17. The organization with its governing body stands where the Aaronic priesthood stood. It is as if the liberating Messiah had not yet come.
In some respects, the position of these millions of so-called great crowd is less than that of the non-priestly Israelites, for they are likened by the Watchtower publications to spiritual Gentiles. The Gentiles living in Israel, if approaching God's temple, had to stop at a wall in the courtyard of the Gentiles, a wall containing the inscription, let no foreigner enter inside of the barrier and the fence around the sanctuary. Whoever is caught will be responsible for his death, which will ensue. Whereas, through his death, Christ tore down the wall dividing Jews and Gentiles, a wall that caused persons to be excluded from citizenship in Israel, and to be as foreigners to the covenants of the promise. The Watchtower organization erects a new wall, spiritually dividing the anointed spiritual Israelites, today numbering some 8,800, from the spiritual Gentiles, numbering into the millions, and placing the latter in a figurative courtyard of the Gentiles. For a Gentile to cross the dividing wall in that courtyard was considered a desecration. For any non-anointed person to cross the spiritual wall, the Watchtower doctrine erects, as by partaking of the emblems at the Lord's evening meal, an act which scripturally signifies nothing more or less than the expression of faith in the ransom sacrifice, or by viewing themselves as in the new covenant Christ mediated on behalf of mankind, would be treated as a similar desecration, an invasion of a holy precinct.
Yeah. There is a difference, though, Ray doesn't point out here,
Yeah.
between the priesthood as it was practiced in Israel
Yeah.
and that practice within the theocracy of the Watchtower.
Because within the priesthood, they weren't just making up rules themselves. They were under the authority of the words of Moses, the prophetic statements of Moses, and that's all they could present.
Inspired words through a prophet ministered through priests. So there's a built-in accountability there. There's the role of the prophet, Moses, and then there's the Aaronic priesthood from his brother.
Yeah.
And
there-
that in itself is a balance.
And there continue to be these checks and balances because other prophets were raised up as well. If there was anything that wasn't right, a prophet was raised up to correct those kinds of things. Well, that doesn't exist in the Watchtower because they're everything.
Yeah, they are the prophets, they are the priests, and they are the kings. So it's a hierarchical theocracy, more like, well, Ignatius Loyola's description here of what Catholic hierarchy was at its worst,
Yeah.
at least in the old days. But in these days, the Watchtower has such a hierarchical, pyramidal theocracy going. So it's not like the Old Testament theocracy, and that's a point we ex-Jehovah's Witnesses need to keep in mind. The
Yeah.
theocratic government, even of the Old Testament, was built along different lines and always had checks and balances.
Yeah, and I think
Counterweight.
when you don't realize that, you're very susceptible of just throwing out the Old Testament,
Yeah.
saying it has no bearing, and it was all wrong. It was instituted by God.
The Old Testament itself would be sufficient to break down this modern so-called Christian theocracy the Watchtower is constructed. So they've got the wall back up that Paul in Ephesians
Yeah.
2:11-18 says was taken down.
Just made it two different classes now.
And they've also got the tier of the priesthood put back up. A priesthood within a kingdom of priests, as Ray has already laid out for us. The kingdom of priests and the holy nation is the calling of all Christians, not a group of priests within the priesthood. So we're going to link on your screen the difference between organic and organized. And we did a playlist called Why JW Org Will Fall and the Church Will Stand. And this playlist, starting with the group on, there was a group within the playlist on Genesis going forward into the Torah, which lays out and explicates the difference between the organic structure of the theocracy that God built through Israel and this organization that is called theocracy today by at least 8.5 million people. And so we'll put that playlist up as well as the first of the series on organic versus organized. Next time, the probationary plight of the great crowd.